Florida suffers from an identity crisis. Dr. David Colburn from the University of Florida once explained that Florida is made up of 1,000 different separate communities, and yet we are one state. And you can see how this is absolutely true when you look at the geography across the state of Florida. If you were to drive from Pensacola to Key West, it would take you more than 16 hours. So you can see how Florida is divided amongst many, many, many different communities. And this problem, this issue, actually reflects on the national level. In 2000, the Brookings Institution discovered that over 1/2 of the United States population actually lives in small communities, less than 25,000 people. So as you can see, we're actually a nation created of small communities. And so as a historian myself, I look at this and think, who's collecting all of these histories? How in the world are we going to collect all of these wonderful local histories and track the history of the United States? And it's actually museums. Museums actually are collecting local histories from communities across the country. It's probably surprising to you that over 50% of the museums in the United States actually exist in small towns. We have over 150 small towns across the state of Florida, and tonight I'm here to talk to you about how small town museums are struggling in the face of an ever-evolving technological landscape, and to offer a few options in which small town museums can keep up and how small town museums can actually help preserve their own history and their own place in their communities. So tonight I'm going to start with a journey. Of course, all good stories start with a journey. And my journey begins in Bartow, Florida, a tiny town of less than 18,000 people, wedged in between Orlando and Tampa. So Bartow, Florida, was putting on an exhibit from the Smithsonian Museum on Main Street. The Smithsonian Museum on Main Street is a wonderful program that provides curated exhibits to small town museums across the country. And what they do, because they can't reach small towns like Bartow, they come out to the humanities councils, and they ask the humanities councils to help them. And the humanities councils are the National Endowment for the Humanities state arm. And so the state arm for the National Endowment for the Humanities travels these exhibits across the country. And so that's what the State Humanities Councils does. And so the State Humanities Councils travel around these exhibits. And so Bartow, so we're traveling to Bartow. So I'm traveling to Bartow, and we drive up, and there's the largest building in the area. For miles, it is the largest building. As you drive up, it is the center of the town, center of the community. And as you drive up, you see the gleaming dome. You see this 3-story gigantic marble history center. And the Polk County History Center is actually founded in this old courthouse. And so we're driving up to see it, and I wanted to explain what the Polk County History Center looked like, because it is the cornerstone of Bartow. It is a cornerstone in terms of meeting places. It's the cornerstone in terms of collecting and gathering history. And so we're driving up, and we park, and we're watching as hundreds and hundreds of people are going to go see this exhibit. And they're flocking in by the hundreds. So as the Smithsonian is actually bringing exhibit content to Bartow. And so we're watching as these people are flocking around this exhibit, and I've noticed something that I haven't seen in a very long time. I'm actually watching people talk to each other. I'm actually watching people engage with each other. They're looking at the exhibit, and they're looking at their friends and their coworkers and their family members, and they're communicating. They're telling stories. They're explaining how this exhibit relates to their own lives. They're explaining their own stories to their community members. And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, this is an amazing moment. Small town America is speaking. Small town America is talking, and yet nobody is listening. Nobody is recording this. Nobody is putting down a posterity for history. And so as I'm walking around and listening to all these stories, the director of the museum, Murtis Young, walks up to me and says, "Jen, this was amazing. This was an amazing exhibit. You have enlightened and enlivened our communities. We've had so many people out. They're so excited. This has galvanized our community. What is next?" And I looked at her and I was like, I have no idea what's next. I have absolutely no clue. There is nothing that's next. The Smithsonian Museum on Main Street exhibit is a traveling exhibit. We're supposed to travel it across 6 different locations in the state over 6-week periods of time. So I didn't have anything else for her. And I thought about this, and I feel like Murtis was explaining something much deeper, much more universal. And that is that small museums across the country are struggling. They're struggling with a multitude of things, but Murtis explained it very, very eloquently. What's next? What can you help us with? And small town museums are struggling with a multitude of things. They're struggling with creating engaging exhibits. How do you change out exhibits with a limited budget? How do you change out exhibits when your staffing is so slim? And so Murtis was explaining this. Small town museums are struggling with changing out exhibits. Their exhibits might have been the same for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. I've seen some of the dust. Some of these exhibits have been up for a very, very long time. Museums are also struggling with staffing. The Smithsonian put out a survey which said that the Smithsonian put out a survey of over 580 museums. It came back saying that small museums could only employ up to 4 employees. And these employees were aged between 50 and 65 years old. So you're seeing a population of almost retirees, a very skeleton staff, and an overwhelming struggle to deal with exhibits. But it gets worse from there. Murtis Young at the Polk County History Center put out a 7-year survey, hired consultants to write a 7-year survey. And in this survey, it said that the Polk County History Center, and I imagine this goes to all small town museums across the state of Florida and across the country, which explained that they have not instituted or implemented any technology in the last 5 years. And in so doing, they are falling farther and farther behind the industry standard and will become less and less relevant to their intended audience. So this is a very bleak outlook for these small museums that are collecting and preserving the history of our country. Our goal today, though, is to not dwell on these negative aspects, but to show that there are some amazing opportunities for small town museums to implement open source, scalable software that can help them provide a digital platform to showcase all the amazing material they've collected over their years. There are new digital ways of storytelling. There are new digital ways to showcase how local stories of our country really matter. And it's thinkFlorida. thinkFlorida is a scalable open source platform software that allows small town museums to upload all of this amazing content. The Florida Humanities Council, myself, actually curates this content. So as museums come up with oral histories, images, text, video, they upload it into a queue, and I'm able to actually curate a statewide story. So we can break down those boundaries between 1,000 communities and create one state. Now, by showing you that, by placing these kiosks, by placing thinkFlorida in museums across the state, I'm able to reach new and excited audience. I'm able to reach school children. I'm able to get millennials to be involved and get a child who's obsessed with manatees to learn about the bathing beauties of the 1950s Miami. I'm able to take people from the Everglades who wouldn't have access to any of this content, any of this material, and teach them about fishing communities in Cedar Key. I'm not just able to connect small town museums across the state, but I'm also able to connect individuals and people. ThinkFlorida is this solution. Now, to go back a little bit in the story, I'm driving back from Bartow and thinking to myself, how in the world can I get interesting, exciting content to the people of the state of Florida? And I had to go back to content. As we all know, content is king. So what content can I use to connect Florida? And I thought and I thought and I thought, what connects all of us? What surrounds us on three sides? It's water. So we began to look at water, how we could look at water through a human lens. And I gathered together folks from the Smithsonian, from the Polk County History Center, from the Bartow Museum, from the St. Petersburg Museum of History, and we got together and sat down and went through all of their content. What could we connect water to as a state? And we ended up developing a couple of questions of how to frame water in a human context. And so we looked at how water can connect people, how water can connect us all as a society. We looked at how water can divide us, how water historically can divide us and divide us currently. We looked at how water changes the way in which we live, changes how we live, change where we live, change what we do for a living. We looked at how water can influence our future. As we move into the future and water becomes scarce in some areas and becomes plentiful in others, how does water affect our future? And so we sorted through all of this content. Now let me tell you, museums have so much content. I mean so much content. We poured through their archives, and we must have had hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of images, of videos, of oral histories, of amazing stuff you have never seen. And so we went through all of this material and thought, what are we going to do with this? What can we possibly do with this? How can we digitally represent this in a flexible platform that can fit in any size museum? So we hired a company. We hired Blue Cadet and sorted through all of this, and we organized a three-pronged approach. We organized a three-prong approach, and the three-prong approach was this. We started off taking these large questions and developing an overarching structure where we created an intro video. And so when you walk up to ThinkFlorida and you press touch to begin, you see a video. And then when the video ends, you see 3 thematic content slots: springs, beaches, and tourism. And from there, you're able to dive into, literally and figuratively, 90 content slots that are changeable based on whatever theme that we choose for that year or that couple of years. And those content slots are the lifeblood of this project. Museums are able to upload as much content as they want, and we then curate these 90 content spots. So before I get too far, I'm going to dive into the video and give you a sneak peek at that. Don't worry, I'm the technical one that has massive technical issues. guys want to hear the song again? No? Okay. So as you can see, the video immediately immerses you directly into the kind of overarching theme of water through a humanities lens. And from here, you're able to really explore the kind of content pieces. And as you can see from this kind of placemat experience, you're able to walk up and touch. This is a gigantic iPad, essentially. It's a 32-inch multi-touch screen that you're able to really explore and dive into. But it's all off-the-shelf technology. And so we're going to dive into a little bit, we're going to jump into we're going to look at some of the content that we have about mermaids. And so mermaids were really important to 1950s Florida, brought a lot of tourists down to Florida before Disney existed. And so here is Ginger Hollowell, one of the original mermaids, was in the movies and everything. And we have these great oral histories from her, but you've probably never heard of her. You probably never heard of her describe what it's like to be a mermaid under the water at Crystal Springs. And so here's a little audio
You
clip.
just feel as if you're in this other world. It's like nothing else you've ever experienced.
And so here you can actually listen to people telling their stories, telling their local stories from across the state. And let's say you wanted to click out of this and then go in and click something else that looked interesting. And so here you might actually see that we have something called Shark World. Shark World was developed in the 1950s as another tourist attraction. You probably didn't know that it was actually on St. Petersburg Beach where they collected sharks and did shows about them. It ended up closing a few years after Jaws. Why, I have no idea. You would think that it would have survived, right? So you have all these amazing pieces of content that you're really able to kind of dive into. And the content keeps going. We have space for up to 90 content slots here for images, video, audio, all this wonderful history that museums have collected for the last 30 years. thinkFlorida is not an innovative hardware project. It's not an innovative software project, but it is an innovative solution to a problem facing more than 50% of museums across the nation. Small town museums are struggling. They're struggling with technology, they're struggling with exhibits. And if we can provide an open source software solution, we can empower them to tell their own stories. We can empower them to collect more stories, to preserve our history, and to give it to the next generations. By providing this software, this free open source software that's easily implementable to any staff member, we are going to be able to connect small town museums across the state of Florida. We're going to be able to connect individuals across the state of Florida. And slowly but surely, we're going to break down those 1,000 different communities and create one Florida. Thank you.